In this video tutorial, I'm going to walk you through how to make quarter square triangles, also known as hourglasses. The first few steps are exactly the same as if you were to make HSTs using the 2 at a time method. You take your 2 squares and put them right sides together, with one of them having a line drawn from point to point along the diagonal of the square. You're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam on either side of that drawn line. And then you're going to cut those pieces apart. I like to press my seams towards the darker fabric, but you do whatever you are comfortable with or whatever your pattern calls for. So here's my 2 HSTs. The next step is a little bit different. We're going to keep going with our HSTs rather than using our HSTs. And take our pieces and we're going to lay them like this, with the color side on one side up and on the other side down. Same with the white, up and down. We're going to draw a diagonal line on the back of one of these pieces, perpendicular, so straight up and down along the diagonal of this piece here. The tips of these locations here, the line might be a little bit off on either of the diagonal points. That's okay. Sometimes your HSTs stretch a little bit when you press them. We're going to take these points, these pieces, and lay them like this, one on top of each other, right sides together, like we do for the beginning square for the HSTs. We're going to take and we're going to feel that center point there, and you can peek in here and make sure that your points are lined up well and they nest really good together since they're pressed in opposite directions. And here I'm going to take a pin and pin it through that point here. I'm going to take and sew a 1/4 inch seam on either side of this drawn line. I'm going to remove my pin before I get to that point of sewing over it though. Like I did with the HSTs, I'm going to cut those apart on the diagonal line, and I'm going to press those, just press the seams to one side is what I did. And there we have 2 untrimmed 1/4 square triangles. Now to trim our 1/4 square triangles, I like to grab a ruler the same exact size, if I can, as my finished HST. So this is a 4.5 inch ruler I'm going to use for my 4.5 inch 1/4 square triangle. Laying this on my piece here, I'm going to line up the diagonal lines, or in my imaginary diagonal line, along this point here, along the second diagonal, and then the center at the center intersection. And I'll trim along all 4 sides, and that will make my finished 1/4 square triangle. One pair of squares will make 2 1/4 square triangles, just like HSTs. If I have a ruler that is not exactly the same size as my finished 1/4 square triangle, it becomes a little tricky, but not impossible. I'm going to take and mark on my ruler the exact size that I want my 1/4 square triangle to be. So I marked with a sticky note here. I marked my line here is going to be a trim line. I marked here is going to be a trim line. I also marked the center point of where that center intersection will need to be. So I know it's going to need to be exactly there along my 2 1/4 inch line here. So I will take my untrimmed 1/4 square triangle and I'm going to line up. You have to have a little bit of an imagination to do this, or you can put some washi tape along this diagonal here too, would help. I line up the tip of my ruler here, and I line up this intersection point here with the diagonal line of my 1/4 square triangle. And this midpoint here should line up exactly with that center intersection there. So I'm going to trim both sides of my 1/4 square triangle, and see how it's got a point here and a point here. I'm going to rotate it, and using those two edges there, I'm going to line those up with my trim line again. And see how this midpoint line here is exactly at my intersection, which is great. I'm going to trim those two, whoop, slippery fabric, trim those two sides there, which gives me a lovely quarter square triangle. So option one will be the easiest way to do it. If you have a ruler the size that you need your finished quarter square triangle to be, that would be great. If not, grab another ruler and just use some sticky notes and mark a line on them. So there's your tutorial on how to make quarter square triangles.